That's right. Hi, everybody who's watching us. I'm having this flashback to the middle of COVID when we went online like within 10 days afterwards and started becoming Jimmy Kimmel and all the talk show hosts right away. And
Oprah.
I haven't been on this kind of format for a while. So with me, the wonderful Jenna Riegel, the wonderful Christal Brown, and missing from our conversation tonight, but here in spirit is Nejla Yatkin. And these three great artists are coming to the dance complex. We're very excited this spring. And speaking of getting beyond COVID, it feels to me like this is the first time that we've had this ability since 2019 to really plan a season and have it make sense and flow together. And we're just really thrilled that you're going to be with us. And so I have dates and all that kind of stuff. And Joe, our ready producer, is in the behind the scenes in our TV studio here at the Dance Complex. I know it looks like I have a Boston skyline. But so we'll do some stuff to it post production so we can get the website and the links on for tickets and all that kind of thing. But so you guys, thanks so much for doing this. It's a couple many weeks out for you, Crystal. You're going to be here at the end of March, end of April-ish,
End of April. Yep, April 20th,
right?
23rd.
And then Jenna, you're right around the corner, like March 1st and 2nd. So maybe you guys, maybe we could even treat this like we're all interviewing each other. So maybe Jenna, you could start and just tell us about the piece and what inspired you to make it, and where you what you think we're going to see when you come here.
Sure. And just cut me off if I'm talking for too long.
Think, think 5 minutes ish, and you'll be fine.
Um, yeah, so the piece is called Varvara, and it is named after a Russian constructivist artist named Varvara Stepanova. Um, and it is a piece that sort of came to me, fell in my lap, so to speak, as opposed to one that we sort of cognize and seek out ourselves. In 2019, when I first joined the faculty at Amherst College, I met this wonderful professor of art and art history, Karen Kohler, during our orientation week, as these things go. Um, and within weeks of the fall semester starting, my first semester at Amherst, she reached out to me and she said, Jenna, the Center for Russian Culture at Amherst is doing this series in the spring where they're going to showcase one work and one artist at a time. And they're going to be showing this photograph by Alexander Rodchenko called Performing Furniture. And it just so happens to be my favorite work of art of all time. And it just so happens that it is in the Mead Art Museum, which is Amherst's art museum collection in their archives. Would you want to make a dance piece or a movement piece in response to it? And being an eager new faculty, I said, of course, sure. Why not? I know nothing about this photograph. I really don't know much about Russian constructivism or Rodchenko, but yes, of course. So the photograph is taken by Alexander Rodchenko, who was Varvara Stepanova's both life partner and artistic partner. And Stepanova is the subject in the photograph, in this beautiful photograph. She's has a kind of extraordinary, open, vibrant face. You are just drawn right into her. And so being a woman myself and wanting to uplift women, I was like, you know what? How about I not dig into who Alexander Rodchenko was, and how about I veer towards Varvara, who's the centerpiece of this photograph and who just intrigued me right away. So the piece was originally supposed to perform in the Russian Center, which is actually more of a kind of study library space, really small. And the gallery was also like a very tiny space. But because the pandemic happened in 2020, it never actually happened. And because we were all isolated on our own so much during the pandemic, It was kind of the one project that stayed alive, and I started to have kind of imagined rehearsals with Varvara
Wow.
and myself in the studio as a collaborator. Um, from things I read about her life, from videos I watched, from looking at her artwork. Um, and so, what will be presented at the dance complex is a bit of an overlay of factual, real information about her and her life, and images of her work and reconstructions of her work. She did set designs, she did textiles, she did costume designs. So just about every visual element in the work is very much her designing, reimagined. And then kind of overlaid with it is my own personal life and questions and occurrences that were happening during this time. So yeah, all of those become kind of in dialogue with what I presume to be her, through what I could read and find out, my kind of imaginings of like who she was and how she would have responded and what her reactions would have been and what she might have told me to do. Yeah, that's
Interesting.
the nutshell.
I saw a beginning of this or an excerpt from this at American Dance Festival. Was that 2021 or
Yeah, no, I think it was more recent than 2021. That might have been where last summer was 24.
maybe
That was
23?
23,
Oh wow.
2020.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Which was great because it was so you know, I think solos are always a challenge, to keep the audience interested and it's you and you alone. Although I remember elements of the set that were with us. Um, as well. And it's just really great to see your uh, interpretation of the story, not knowing this little bit, this backstory that you just brought to it for me, and this idea that she's speaking to you, I think is kind of interesting. A lot of us do community engagement work, and sometimes I talk to myself in those processes. I talk to the people we're interviewing to bring to it, but it's like communing with the spirit, which must have been interesting for you. Had you worked that way before?
No. I don't think I'd ever quite. I mean, I've certainly done a lot of works where, well, I shouldn't say that. A work that is actually really adjacent is a work that I did with Bill T. Jones, Arnie Zane Company. It was the first installment of a trilogy of what the Analogy trilogy that Bill made. And the first one was very much based on interviews that Bill did with his mother-in-law, Dora Omelon,
Oh wow.
who was a French Jewish nurse during World War II. And the work that she had to do, where she, in some ways, was working kind of underground to get people out of internment camps and whatnot, but then on the kind of the facade was that she was a nurse, like working for the internment camp, if that makes sense. But meanwhile, she was doing all this work to try to help people and get them out of there. And Bill had me do a lot of the sort of embodiment of Dora and speaking her words from the interviews that we listened to that then got transcribed and we used it as a script. Dora was alive at the time, though I had met Dora many, many times. She passed away later. So that was different than
Yeah.
with Varvara. There's no way for me to like do any kind of rectification of like how close am I interpreting this
Yeah.
person's
Yeah.
personality and thoughts and experiences. Yeah.
Well, interesting. It's like, what is truth anyway, but
Yeah.
our version of it as well. I'm good. It's Crystal. Maybe you could just also give us a snapshot of the work. And then it sounds to me like you guys might just, well, we might find ourselves talking to each other, having Crystal's work talk to you, Jenna, and
Great.
Nejla, who's here in spirit. She might start talking to us too. But
Well,
Crystal,
my company is named INSPIRIT.
that's
So here we go. What we're going to be doing at the Dance Complex is a piece called What We Ask of Flesh that premiered at the end of 2023. We are so thankful for the NDP production grant that allowed us to get over the hump and fulfill a 7-year research project. So What We Ask of Flesh came to me as an inspiration by the writer Ramika Bingham, who wrote a book of poetry called What We Ask of Flesh. I picked up that book of poetry probably around 2016, and that ended up being a solo that I performed at the Kelly Strayhorn Center in Pittsburgh.
Oh,
And
wow.
then after that, it became an iteration of pieces, commissions with the Earl Mosley Institute for the Arts, Keene State College, Middlebury College, and just different students that I would work with all over. And it started to be an iteration of pieces called What We Ask of Flesh Compassion, What We Ask of Flesh Journey, What We Ask of Flesh Survival. And I treated this creative process similar to how a painter will paint a series of daffodils. And I just kept waiting for the next iteration or the next question to come. And in those iterations, we then brought that research back together at Jacob's Pillow during the pandemic in about 2021. And we spent that time combing through about 6 years of writings and videos and phrase material, and then bringing into kind of agreement what we thought flesh would be at that moment. So this is in 2021. 2018, my mother passed away from vascular dementia, which actually started to really inform the work because I started to understand that the definition that the company and I had come up with for flesh, which is the intermediary between the world and the soul, is one of those chasms where when that thing gets full, the actual precipice of life falls into the next realm, right? And so we're just combining all of that experiential learning in real life with this artistic practice and all of this research. And that's how we got to the idea of What We Ask of Flesh. Then we brought in our dramaturg, Aria Julia Brown, who then worked through, again, the concept we were working with, but then the characters that are developed within the work, and who people represent. So there's flesh, there's violence, there's love, there's curiosity. And then that was layered on with the costume designer, Trabian Pollard, who came in with a really beautiful palette of um, like permeations of color and flesh, which is then overlaid with the media design by Scotty Hardwig, who is taking actual hand drawings and replicating them and putting them on the body and in space so that we get this tenuous feeling that we're close to reality, but we could also be close to the divine simultaneously, and that we are of this world and not of this world. And so it gives the viewer, I think, a kind of complete sense of how their mind and their body and their spirit find some type of truth throughout the work. So,
Wow. Lots of layers there. And Crystal, when you come to us, you'll be doing some adjacent work. I don't know if it directly feeds the piece, but you'll be working with Reverend Ellis's church. Is it St. Paul? Yes.
yep, St. Paul AME Zion Church.
Yeah.
And so what we're going to do there is that they already have a dance ministry, right? So we just want to make sure that we are bringing their bodies and our bodies into collaboration so that we can see each other as, again, spiritual beings having a human experience, regardless of denomination or color or race or creed, but really bringing that higher vibration of how we as people navigate our humanity, even when our realities are different.
Yeah, we're so thankful you're going there because I've known Reverend Ellis for a long while, and we sit in meetings together in the Central Square, and he's such a wonderfully warm gentleman that I thought
Yeah.
I know we have to work with you somehow, and it was the right time and the right person, and you being the
Yeah.
right.
Really beautiful man, amazing pastor. I mean, I got to sit in service the last time I was there for the site visit. And the good old Southern country girl in me just walked in there and saw those stained glass windows and was like, "Oh my God, it's a real church." Oh
Yeah,
my,
yeah,
so just really, really beautiful congregation here.
yeah. I'm not stalking anybody, but I have been known to like wait outside the church, just listening to the songs, on a Sunday morning. It's true in the South End too. There was a beautiful church, which is now unfortunately condominiums. Same thing when I was here, 30 years ago. Um, it's so interesting to hear you both speak because there's elements of your work that echo with Nejla's work as well. And I won't pretend to speak about it, but I'll just give you the briefest snapshot of it. And maybe while we're talking, you might have questions for each other or for Nejla that we can just note, and she can answer in the spirit world to us right now as we speak. Ouroboros is the name of her work, and the work happens in the round, and we're trying to recreate kind of like a Turkish tent, kind of like a salon is not quite the right word, but just a feeling of a different space other than a theater or a traditional space. And there'll be pillows on the floor. Um, and Nejla, who I'm sure you both have come cross paths with over the years, is a unique being herself. You know, she's part Turkish background, Egyptian background, Middle East. This all these things that come together, and she'll be speaking and singing in several different languages, and there'll be American Sign Language as well, and that becomes part of the choreography within it. The score is by our good friend Shamu, who unfortunately passed. I know you both worked with him probably up at Bates and other places over the years. He too played at the dance complex, and he played for my classes at the Boston Conservatory, as we were just talking about in the 1980s. So,
He
uh,
actually developed the score for our training module, Liquid String.
wow, amazing, amazing. So,
Yeah.
so he's permeated into the work, and we're thrilled about that. And just hearing Nejla and I went over to the Goethe Institute because of her German roots, and you guys are like this first class of artists that I've brought in to say how can we make some connections with others in the world. Likewise, Jenna, we've been talking with Anna Weinstein from the Ballet Russe, and she's a producer and a curator throughout the city, and has this background. She herself coming from Russian roots. So she's going to speak a little bit before the show, and we're going to. I know you'll be busy warming up and things like that, but. But just to that all three of these things, these productions have some kind of as you've just said, some kind of talking to the spirits that are not there, spirits that are there, in whatever form they are. And I guess we've replicated that in trying to get you here so that there's people who, I hope folks from the church and the Goethe Institute join us in performance. But even if they don't, I feel like there's some kind of goodwill, ushering us into this performance world this way. So we're very excited. What do you want to ask each other? Anything comes to mind?
Oh gosh, I mean, just something that struck me in hearing about your work, Christal, uh, resonates with some of the themes that bubble up in the work that I made as well, which is the kind of I don't want to say expiration date of the body, but
Yeah.
but yes, in some ways the expiration date of the body. And as we were talking about before we started recording, like as dancers, the way that you start to feel things shifting and changing. And uh, in my work, it's more trying to like switch this perspective of viewing the body as something that is a machine that breaks and we try to fix it, and to embracing its kind of unpredictable, untamable wildness. But something you said about the flesh when it gets filled up, like when it basically is filled up, then we have to pass on or move on. And I just wanted to hear more about that because I don't think I've ever heard it languaged like that, this idea of like that it can't contain us anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the things that really kind of coalesced, when we got to Jacob's Pillow. And again, I had been my mother's caretaker. I was doing it from long distance, from North Carolina to Vermont. And I remember the day that the light went out in her eyes. I remember the day that I looked at her and was talking to her and she wasn't there anymore. And then there were at least a year and a half later before she actually passed away. Right. And so I think we as human beings who want to hold on to people, we don't, even if we notice that the light is out, we think we can stoke it again.
Mhm.
right? We think that there's something we can do to like reignite this flame. And I think again, like we know neurologically, we know all these things that the body is just housing everything that happens to us, right? And so how much can it hold, right? All of us have different thresholds of comfort, discomfort, reality, corporeality, all these things. And so what I see, and then what I really just, I talk to my students, I talk to my clients about this all the time is that this idea that we can't decipher at some point when everything just gets swirled in there, we can't decipher truth from reality. And we have this kind of onslaught of Alzheimer's and dementia and all these things. And we also have people in isolation. Right. So when that swirl starts to happen and there's no reflection of a different reality or no one there to kind of bounce your idea of what's happening off of, then you get consumed by your own creation. Right. And so a lot of us don't get to live these big, amazing, fulfilling, creative lives. Many of us have small routines that when they get ingrained in our bodies and our mind, those are the only pathways we know. So there's nowhere for the flesh to expand or spill over into a different area, a different love, a different creative endeavor. And so we then get stuck, right? And then when we get stuck, the flesh just starts to, kind of rattle within a cage, right? And that rattling disturbs the spirit, disturbs the mind, disturbs the heart. And that disturbance, I think, leads to the descent, right? And so that's where I think also we started to get to. There was a lot of anger, there's a lot of grief in this process. There was a lot of there were one of the dancers who plays violence, that's his character. He had a huge pushback when that was the name that he was given because he didn't want to be associated with that as a black man. He was like, there's enough violence in the world. But then we really came to, like giving birth is a violent act, right? Where both lives are in jeopardy simultaneously. So violence doesn't have to have a negative connotation. There is righteous anger, there is, righteous violence. There are things that come from the body that seem aggressive, but they are there to find some type of mystical, spiritual agreement. Yeah.
As you say that, I realize I just had read on Nejla's writing for Ouroboros that the Ouroboros is actually an ancient symbol
Yeah.
found as old in Tutankhamun's tomb, and it's a snake eating its own tail, and it's kind of violent in the sense that it's the necessary death before rebirth. And
Yeah.
so talk about violence in that context, it's like breaking something to be reborn.
Yeah. Our former executive director has a company called Ouroboros, right?
Oh,
Like I've
wow.
seen this symbol, right, all
Yeah.
over the right? So this, we're in one of those times where like everything is coming around and for us not to do something better with this cycle, not just as artists, but as just as people, we just got to notice that it's all connected in some way, whether it feels distal or emergent, right? It's all happening. Yeah.
Christal, do you have a question for Jenna?
Yeah. So Jenna, listen, I'm bad at rehearsal, right? I just tell people all the time, I tell people the truth. I love to make, I love to create, I love communing with the people that I make with, but like rehearsal and like making it better and like, is that really the step? Like I try to hire people for that because I'm not good at it. But in this process, what's striking to me is that I don't know if I would have the discipline to
Mm,
have a rehearsal process with this other thing that's speaking through me and allow myself or garner myself the discipline to make it real, right? Rather than like, oh, I'm coming in to have this experience again, rather than like, oh, I'm going to make this into a piece. Like, I don't know. How did that work for you?
It was pretty wild and unusual. I'll just say I'm a Virgo, so usually things are like
Mhm.
exactly like it's like
I
we're
know
gonna do
some
this,
Virgos.
and
Yeah.
then we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do this. So it was very kind of out of my normal mode of functioning to go to a studio solo and to kind of invite the floodgates to open and it ended up being, I think it was partially like the nature of some of the things I was going through personally were potent enough, they were intense enough, that they wanted this outlet to kind of like so I could rebirth myself, using this word again. Like they needed to move out into other realms so as to not get stuck or be rattling like inside outlets. They needed outlets. So in some ways it was very easy to just go to the studio and be like, this is an outlet. It also felt like it was such a strange time to be making work because there was no guarantee of when the pandemic was going to stop, if it was going to stop, if things were going to emerge again. So in some ways, my kind of usual product oriented way of being was completely like quieted. And that also allowed me to be in the space kind of agendaless. And so things I just started singing songs with myself and like recording. I'd record myself singing an initial song and then I'd play it and sing back with it and put on another layer. And I'm not a singer and I don't harmonize well, so this is not something I like do. But something about the sacredness of the space and the really kind of like low stakes for me, like just experimentation, afforded me the bravery to do those things, as just play and experimentation. And for whatever reason, they just ended up landing and working, kind of in their first iteration. Sometimes I did Peter, the version you saw at ADF was like all movement and like with
Right.
very little text on the front end. The version you'll see at Dance Complex, I speak a whole lot throughout, like in different iterations. But I just allowed myself to basically like channel Varvara. So I was speaking monologues into, recording on my computer that then I was like revisiting and looking at like, what was that? Who was that? Why am I saying those things? And, I make no claim to them actually being, for me to actually be a conduit of Varvara, but it was enough to, in the world of theatricality to pretend to put that on and pretend that I was, seeing the world or viewing the world. And interestingly enough, the results are very what's the word I'm looking for? It's not as direct as like a theater production where I'm like, and now I'm playing the role of Varvara Stepanova. I'm purposely like confusing things madly, where sometimes I'm talking about her, sometimes I'm talking as if I'm her. I'm speaking with a Russian accent, albeit poorly, but then I'm speaking as myself. Like it all gets very complicated on purpose, just to kind of sidestep reality, like our notions of reality. Yeah.
Well, if it were narrative that were, beginning, middle, and end, then it might be a short story or it might be, a play in the more kind of normal sense of the word. What I hear both too, I'm thinking a lot of well, one, I'm getting excited to see the works live, so that's
I know, me too. I want to come back.
right. And two is, we just started our yearly Masset cohort, which is our make it, share it, show it, choreographic cohort thing. And the wonderful Karen Krolak has been, we kind of design it together and then she takes off and does it. But it strikes me, just apropos of them, because I was with them for the last two Monday nights, just this idea of making this work where um, the permission to anything is open to experiment with, so if it feeds the work. And so many of us in our traditional and especially being a little older, the more traditional kind of, you learn movement in class, you learn a phrase, and then when you go to choreograph, you take a phrase and bend it and variate it, a la Doris Humphrey 17 times. And And do you think that, like Martha Graham, wherever you stand is the most important part of the stage, as opposed to Doris Humphrey, who said center was the most important part. So you have all these rules, and you both speak of breaking the rules. I know you both have Bill T in your background. I'm lucky to have Liz and others in my background who are rule breakers in that way. And it seems to me that we come from a lot of us come from a more traditional kind of college background where we're taught choreography a certain way. But here you're talking about things that I don't think happens in most situations in academia unless you're teaching them yourselves now. What with both these pieces or other works, can you talk about this process and how different this might be from one of your first, ventures out that was more traditional in the making,
I'll let you start, Jenna.
Sorry, I went on and on, leading the witness.
Um, Gosh, I mean, one of those, well, I made some things in grad school. I actually started choreographing much later than a lot of my colleagues. I kind of sidestepped it and avoided it as much as possible. I consider myself to be a performer through and through. So it's actually been kind of entering into academia that I have had to do it more for the
Right.
job, for the students,
Right.
for the research. And but there was a time that when I was still working with Bill, I was also getting um, commissioned to like come do residencies at universities and make a work in a week, those wild processes where you're just like, what? You've got 25, 30 hours at most. You've never met these students. Go. And certainly those processes, Peter, were more like, what's the base phrase material, like what's the movement material, what's the music, what are the configurations and reconfigurations. But I did on this wonderful earnest group of students at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. Not didn't have like eons and eons of extensive training in many different forms. Most of them, the movement material that I was drawing from Bill and I was drawing from my work with David Dorfman, like they were just like, whoa, what is that? Had never encountered anything close to it. Um, but even then, I do remember like asking them to speak a little bit, to have a couple figures who seemed to be more inclined towards speaking and theatricality, kind of start the piece off, I think, with some text that I think I had drawn from The Unbearable Lightness of Being, that novel. Um, I also grew up as a theater kid also. Like I was always doing dance and theater. And so I think for me, I've never kind of fully landed in the dance zone. It's always been natural for me to want to kind of weave them. And I think that's why I worked for the companies that I worked for also is because they were already doing those things too.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. That's great. Christal.
Yeah, I think I mean, very similar. Um, by the time I got out of undergrad, like these kind of smaller commissions where like people come make a dance for my high school kids. And so there's a rubric, I think there's a system that you kind of get down pat that if I got to do this in a week, I do it in a week. And so with the iterations of the piece, I used that formula with all these strangers. Right. And so then I was like, oh, okay. If the strangers get this far with this idea, just a small portion of it, like what we ask of flesh, survival. Let's just focus on survival and see what happens. Let's just focus on compassion and see what happens. Then bringing that back to the company, which at this point is a new iteration of the company, but the company is 20 years old. And so there are people in the company now who I've been teaching since they were 16. And then there's Robin Wilson, who's one of the founding members of Urban Bushwomen who I worked for. So all of this, it's just a full circle moment for me. There's Farai Malianga, who's one of our composers, and I've been working with him for the last 20 years. There's Deborah Felmuth, who's one of our composers here at the college where I teach. So it's just all of an amalgamation of experience too, which for me just kind of bolsters the experience and the thematics of the work, because these people are from different versions of my life or different sectors and different time periods of my life. And so to watch them all kind of come together in this way is a different type of alchemy. And
It's
the creative process for it is very different because I know them in a different way, right? It's
right.
not about are you doing the step? It's are we in the same palette? Are we on the same frequency? Can you bring this thing I'm asking you to do to another level?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing when we figure it out as makers that it's sure what happens in the studio is very important. But it's just like maybe one tenth of it, maybe it's just so interesting all the other relationships you have to it, and not even mentioning funding and all that other stuff. But
Yeah.
it's so much more. Uh, uh, when I was teaching more with composition with Liz around the country, and I likened the process to going shopping. Making movement was like going shopping and just stoking the shelves with canned goods and frozen food and fresh vegetables and whatever it was. And then you'd make the dance out of that. You'd cull that. You'd curate all that into a meal. And I've never thought of it this way until you guys are both chatting and saying, I've never thought about it like, oh, sure, I can make a dance in a week. I've made a dance in, you know, 4 hours if I've had to. But then it's also when you've given the time that you both have invested in this work and the layers, it's like you had to learn, I'm sure, different ways to prepare the food, not only shop it and decide what comes out of the cabinet, but oh, this approach to the text, I'm going to record myself and I'm going to play it back and I'm going to, work that way. It's like sautéing versus, broiling your lobster, like the different ways that you do it. So I'm very excited. You're
Yeah.
making me excited to choreograph again.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Oh.
much, both of you. It's so great. If you had a minute more to tell us exactly, why we should come and see the show or each other's show, what are your famous last words to get my butt into the theater?
These are probably not famous last words, but I will say, because we were talking about it, that the first half, as I created it, I was basically by myself in the space. But then the second half, which is much more, the first half is very Virgo-like. It's very planned, it's very precise, it's very repeatable, and the practice of it is very familiar to me. And then the second half is almost entirely scored. So that's when I brought in Anna Adams Stark as a director and Kathy Couch as a lighting designer slash also just like an artistic advisor,
Great
because
line.
she's done so much. And so to have them hold the space for me while I was working through these scores was absolutely necessary, because at that point I was like, I can't tell. A video does not capture what's going on here. So I need actual real live beings in the space with me to be like, yes, lean in there, or no. Like, don't let yourself go down that habit or pattern or whatever. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned both of them who will be with me in Boston. But 30 seconds or 10 seconds left. Gosh, it's come for the wild ride of it.
Yeah.
Come to set yourself free. I don't know.
Well, knowing you as a dancer and a performer, I can maybe add those words is that you're exquisite to watch and experience on stage, and I never feel like you're insulting me with your technical intelligence, even though it's very intelligent. You are a giving and warm performer, sharing what your work. So I would say that if you want to copy that down, and I'll make the oath to it later if you want me to. So,
Thanks, Peter.
Crystal.
Let's see. If you have had 30 seconds to tell you why you should come to the dance complex to see what we ask of flesh, it would be to honor your own humanity, one, and to find the ritual of your own yes.
That's great. Wonderful. And I'm going to say that Nejla's answer is somewhere between those two and above and beyond it as well. Thanks so much for sitting down and taking time out of life to so you can bring life to us when you come with us. I'm not going to do the dates here, but Joe is there. I see him in the back of my mind. He's spirit is communicating with me right now. We'll put into the listing that accompanies this YouTube or Vimeo, however it comes out. The dates, dancecomplex.org. You can go to performance/events and find out the dates. We've got first days of March with Jenna Riegel, later in April with Christal Brown, and nestled in between later in March is Nejla. So thank you guys so much. And I'm big hugs to you. And I'm really grateful and that you're coming to see us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.